This is Festival Past Stories, a podcast series is told by the people who create and make festivals come to life. You will go behind the stage, kitchen, or studio door to hear the stories of passion and inspiration that started some of the world's most beloved festivals. Hear the startup stories and how an idea went from what if to what's next. All right, welcome back, friends. This is Festival Past Stories, where we take you behind the stage, the kitchen, the studio door, and today we're going to go behind the mic and the camera and in front of the camera and all over the place with the human entertainment Swiss Army knife that is Sareth Ney. Among his other talents, he's the founder of Sareth Fest, which is a music and comedy festival, and we're going to hear all about that. Sareth, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you, Pat?
Good, man. I know in 2020 that's a very loaded question to ask people how they're doing. They're like, well, how much time do we have here? Because I got a lot to get off my mind. But we've had a lot happening in the last couple of weeks, elections and so on. We will not talk about any of that right now, but what I really want to do is we want to hear all about the festival, but there's a lot to unpack here. And speaking of packing or unpacking, I want to start with the story of your parents fleeing Cambodia under Pol Pot regime, which I read a little bit about, but this is a thrilling story, and I would love if you would share that with our listeners.
Absolutely. My parents, they escaped the Khmer Rouge when they were just teenagers, and my parents would tell me their stories about, like, my dad was in the Cambodian army with his best friend when they were like 15 or 16, and he would tell me like war stories of him having to carry guns and
literally war stories.
Yeah, literally war stories. And I went there about 3 times. The first 2 times I was there with my parents, of course. And he goes, "You see that tree over there? It's like in between a bunch of rice paddies." And I'm like, "Yeah, Dad." He goes, "That's where I buried my gun." And I said, "That's when I had enough." And I'm like, "Wow." And when he escaped, he had bullet wounds in the back of his, like, they were shooting at him like the guerrilla armies and the Khmer Rouge and stuff. And he still has bullet wounds to this day, of course. And they escaped barefoot, went through like rivers with leeches in them and mountain passes. There was landmines, of course. But they made their way to Thailand to a safe refugee camp. And they learned how to cook there. And my sister was born at a refugee camp, and they remembered sleeping on like concrete floors because there was not enough room for the like beds. And they went to the Philippines too, and then that's when they got a sponsor, and they learned how to cook there. And they only had a quarter in their pocket, and they got a sponsor. They brought them all the way out to Colorado, of all places, where it's totally polar opposite, if you will, because it's much colder there as compared to Cambodia, where it's more tropical.
Yeah, I've heard about the wonderful tropics of Cambodia. Yeah,
indeed, it's safe to go now, but back then not so much. And the buildings were all tore up from like the explosions and all that bad stuff. So, yep, and that's like pretty much their escape from Cambodia in a nutshell. That's all that I've been told so far.
Cambodia to Colorado. It seems like it's like, where do you want to go next? It's like, well, Denver sounds like a good place. Yeah, let's do it. I mean, they left with quite literally a quarter in their pocket, and I know that you have a company now that is a Dreams, or a Quarter in a Dream Productions, the name of your production company, right?
A Quarter in a Dream Pictures. Yep.
Quarter in a Dream Pictures, and there's 3 stories behind where you got that name. That obviously is one of them. What are the other 2 behind that? Because I know there was a Clive Barker introduction, or you approached him. I mean, you were truly the American dream. You went from first generation, your family started with nothing, and then all of a sudden you're rubbing elbows with Clive Barker. Yeah. I heard you wrote him a letter, then maybe you wrote him another letter, or maybe 75 letters, and not that it was a stalking situation, but it got to a point where he actually reached out to you and things took off from there. So I would love to hear more about that.
Most definitely. It's all started from I was on MySpace back in the day. And
MySpace, hold on 1 second. Friends, MySpace was a social network and you might be the last member of MySpace if you're not still on there. There's no way.
I'm still on there. I was trying to escape everything else. And
How do you log in with like a rotary cell phone? How do you get onto MySpace now? This is like the dark web. I don't even know how I would even get onto MySpace if I tried.
You can just put myspace.com and recreate your old account and
I don't believe
music on there and everything. I figured I need to escape Facebook and I need to go back to MySpace. Tom was much friendlier and hardly any rules. And
yeah. How are the pollsters on MySpace? Did they have the election right? Were they the ones who called it right? Is that where the correct pollsters were living?
I guess so, because I rarely check those bulletin boards anymore. I just I'm like, let's see if I can still put music on this thing and all that good stuff, and see if I can design my own background again.
Hey, look at that. Exciting.
Old memory.
I remember they were pretty much just leaning toward the music world was using that a lot. That seemed to be the last hope for MySpace. But now it's your space pretty much because you're the member. There we are. Folks, we are live with every single member of MySpace right now. Okay. So I want to hear more about this story here. Go back to the Clive Barker story.
Indeed. So someone messaged me on MySpace and said, Clive Barker is releasing a new book called Mr. Be Gone. It's about a demon that possesses a book while you read it. I'm like, this sounds really interesting. So I went to Colorado Springs and I picked up a book and I was waiting for my doctor's appointment to happen. And it was Mr. Be Gone. It was like on that table as soon as you walk in. I'm like, all right, I'm picking it up. And the first 27 pages went by fast. I'm like, this is, the most awesome book I've ever read so far in life. It's really happening. This demon is really possessing this book. And so I went back home, got done with the appointment, and I said, Mom, Dad, I really have to buy this book, but I don't have any money because I'm a broke college student. And like, no problem, we'll buy you this. Here's some money, buy the book, and bring it home and read it. And I'm like, okay. So there was a point in the book where it says, see me jumping on the page, that's me jumping on it and making it move. And the ceiling fan wasn't on, nothing was causing it to move, and the page was moving up and down. It was nuts. And I'm like, all right, so Clive scared me with Hellraiser and Candyman, and now Mr. Be Gone.
Scared everybody.
Indeed, he's just a pro. He's like, a master of horror, one of them. And I said, all right, I got to graduate college. I wanted an internship to graduate. One, I reached out to a professional wrestling company that never got back to me. And the other was Clive Barker. Those were like my only two options. I didn't know who else to reach out to. I didn't want to stay home for an internship. I needed to get away. So I reached out to Clive, and his people, his website reached back out to me after they reached out to his folks in LA. And I'm like, this is wild. And they go, we just want your resume and set out some dates and see which one works, which dates work best for both of us. I'm like, okay. So when I sent out my resume, all I had was Home Depot on it because I used to work there and nothing else. There was like no film, no nothing. Like, why are you wanting this? You
got to start somewhere, though. You got to work somewhere, right? You got to, Home Depot, Bed Bath and Beyond. I don't know if there'll be enough time to do both of them. But anyway, you got to. My first job was working at a soda and burger shack on a beach boardwalk. And I mean, if you look at my high school resume, there's 75 different jobs going on in there. Now we're talking together on a podcast, so
most definitely got
to start somewhere. Home Depot probably in there somewhere along the way too.
Absolutely. And so I wrote him a letter, and they scheduled the date Friday the 13th at 4:30 p.m. of all days.
I think every day is Friday the 13th for Clive Barker.
I think so too, absolutely. And it was June of 2008, I believe. And so we scheduled a date, and it was too expensive to buy any plane tickets. And I took my cousin, my parents, and we all went out there, and from Colorado to California. And so I dropped him off at the Beverly Hills park, and my dad goes, here, take the car. And he goes, one day I hope you get to have your own house out here, because he saw all the big houses out there.
Yeah.
And I'm like, all right, I don't think I want to live out here, but if it happens, great. But
I don't think I want to live out here in a 7-bedroom, 10,000 square foot mansion. I don't want that.
Nope, not at all. And So I go there to a studio, and I was sweating bullets, and because I'm nervous. It's like 4:15 in the afternoon, and because I want to arrive early for the thing, and I had my resume and everything, and I ring the gate, and they let me in, they buzz me in, and then I see Hellraiser posters on the left, and I'm like, I'm at the right place. There's Nightbreed on the right.
It's like your personal. It's like a mecca almost. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I get a bottle of Dasani, a small one. And I'll always remember that. And they're like, all right, we got to move this to another, place. And I'm like, this is, I told my parents this is the address, And so we walk up to a couple more buildings, and they're like, so this is the place. And he goes, it's another studio. And I'm like, this is cool. So I was thinking if we open the door to the other side, it's probably Pinhead or something. So we walk in
you open the door, it just goes into some dark portal, and you're like, you have to jump in. You have no idea where you're going to go.
Indeed. And so we walk in there, and out of the blue, Clive walks up the stairs, and I'm like, this is not happening,
Yeah.
And
it's a real experience.
And I was like, this is my hero, and I light up like a Christmas tree. And he conducts the interview himself, because I was only expecting his assistants to do it, because his people, kind of thing. And so we sit across from each other, and he was like, all right, I want, why do you want to do this? I'm like, well, because I want to be just like you. And he goes, I want to be involved with the action figures, the video games, the comic books, the movies, the whole night. And he goes, the whole shebang. I'm like, yeah, the whole shebang. And then he goes, what do your parents think? I'm like, well, my dad's behind me 100%. My mom's not so much, because I'm the baby of the family.
Yeah.
And the third is like, are you out here for business or pleasure? And I didn't know his sense of humor at the time. And I was like, business because I'm with you, and pleasure because I went to Disneyland and Universal Studios. And he laughed, and he goes, all right, kid, you got the job. And the whole time I had a quarter in my pocket, just like my parents did. And it was given to me by my buddy Travis. And it was like an uncirculated Colorado coin. And so he goes, what you have to do now is, we have an intern now. But he'll be here for at least a year. So what I want you to do from this point until then is that you have to write me every single week until you get here. And every single email was about my life.
Yeah.
It's no holds barred, like my darkest days to my brightest hours and all that stuff, or days, or whatever you want to say. And he was with me along the way. It was pretty awesome. And that's when he turned me into a writer. And I can't thank him enough for that.
Amazing. Unbelievable. And then you started writing your own jokes. You started writing movies. You started writing all sorts of stuff. So how did Sareth Fest begin? I want to fast forward to that.
Okay.
You've been doing this now for 10 years.
Yep. It all started at Clive's studio. And he was like, all right, you got, you have this huge creative space, at your disposal. You can take pictures of cabbages if you want. You can do whatever you want, and just be respectful and communicate. Yeah. And that's
use
all
your time wisely.
Yeah, indeed. And so it was and so I started painting and all that stuff. And I just got done watching Big Trouble in Little China at the Egyptian Theater with John Carpenter and Rain, the guy that played Rain, and he had a Q&A afterwards. Mm-hmm. I'm like, this is pretty neat. So I went back to the studio and said, hey, I just went and saw John Carpenter and Rain with the Big Trouble in Little China. Let's have something like that here with my short films. They're like, okay, cool. Let's call it Sareth Fest. And I'm like, that's a bit too much, but I guess we'll call it Sareth Fest. So it was like my short film festivals. I made 5 of them, and we'll have a Q&A and all that stuff. And I made a big deal out of it.
So hold on, Clive Barker endorsed your festivals, is correct?
Yep, it was grown right out of his screening room. So it was pretty neat. That's where we watched movies and stuff, and out of his studio. So it was a pretty cool, awesome place. So I made a big deal on it about social media. The old vice president was mad about it. He goes, we can't have people come over. And I'm like, I know. So it was just his family, his nephew and people that worked there at the time.
Yeah.
And I just showed my short films, and we had Q&A just like John Carpenter did with Big Trouble in Little China, with my experience. And And then I took a 4-year break from that because I wanted to focus on concert journalism while I was out in LA. And I was with Clive in his office, and he was like, "We know you love hip hop because you love the Wu-Tang Clan." And
I couldn't tell. I couldn't tell that you like Wu-Tang.
And
Nothing gave that away.
And he was like, "Well, you got to branch out and listen to other genres too, and cover their music and locally and internationally known people." And I just kept on getting photo passes to all these shows, whether they were sold out and press passes. And I went. It was like pretty much like a time machine because I went back all the way to the '60s. I got to see UFO at the Key Club and The Doors without Jim Morrison at the House of Blues on Sunset Strip.
Yeah.
And it was the whole wildest, 3 or 4 years of journalism.
Robbie Krieger, Ray Manzarek, and there's another one. Well, Jim Morrison. There were only 3 of them. Weren't there originally, or 4 of them originally?
I think 4 of them, I believe, yeah. And it was a pretty cool show. Mark McGrath from Sugar Ray and Linda Perry from Four Non Blondes were like 2 of the folks that sang lead vocals for them. And so how the fest continued on was like I told Clive, I'm moving back to Colorado. All the venues are closing. Like the Key Club was closed. The House of Blues was about to close. The Gibson, Malibu Inn. And I'm like, I felt like Indiana Jones in the temple, in the Temple of Doom when the walls were closing in. And I'm like, they're taking all the cool venues away. And I'm like, he goes, I understand. And he was really sad. I was really sad.
Yeah.
And so I took what I learned from Clive, and I took what I learned from the concert journalism stuff, and I applied it to my hometown of Pueblo, Colorado, like just local bands. I wanted to be like, I've read about everyone that I grew up listening to, from the 90s and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
And as far back as the 60s, because my time machine broke. And I went and applied.
Always happens. My time machine's in the shop. It's just never works right.
Most definitely. So I wrote about it my hometown, all the local musicians from jazz to funk to ska, hip hop. But I didn't know there was so many genres in my hometown, which is wild. And I took pictures. I never asked for anything, and I took them and I put them on a national platform at the time that I wrote for. And I didn't think anything of it or anything would happen. And I started performing stand-up comedy there, and just open mics because no one would put me on shows. And I'm like, I don't know how to get myself on a show. I'm just
every stand-up starts the same way. It's not like, well, here's a guy, let's bring him up right now. He's a really funny guy. You got to bring those bringer shows, those stand-up shows. Those you got to bring 5 people, and everybody has to drink a couple of drinks, and it's a revenue open mic night for the clubs, but. Every good comedian started out there at the very grassroots effort. Well, they probably started in 4th grade when they were playing pranks on their friends, but for the professional comedians out there, they all did the same thing. So, absolutely.
I forgot to mention, like, my very first performance at a stand-up comedy was at an open mic in LA, because I was always cracking jokes with Clive and telling him my silly stories from LA, and he goes, have you ever tried stand-up? I'm like, nope. He goes, promise me before you leave here, you go to the Jump Cut Cafe in Studio City, and you tell everyone your jokes and your stories in 5 minutes. And I'm like, okay. So I dressed up as my superhero alter ego, Wu Manchu, which is inspired by the Wu-Tang Clan, because I was so nervous. And I did 5 minutes in front of, his employees, like his special effects makeup artists and stuff like that at the time. And they're like, the host was like, all right, where did that superhero go? And I just changed into my old Rage Against the Machine shirt when I saw him at the Memorial Stadium out in LA back in 2011. And I walked back in with it. And he was like, all right, this is where did that superhero go? I need him to do 5 more minutes. I'm like, I can't do 5 more minutes. I don't have that much jokes. Like, this is barely my first time ever doing stand-up. Yeah. And so he goes, so you're pulling an Andy Kaufman on me, aren't you? And I'm like, yep, I'm his manager. So I went back home, did all that stuff that I mentioned earlier. And I said, hey, I'm moving to Florida. I just want 3 comics and 3 bands. And I tagged 1 member of each band that I wrote about. And so they all said, we all want in on this. And so I'm like, crap. So yeah, I'll book everyone. I can't pay everyone. He goes, don't worry about it. You gave us press. and you put the town like of our music scene on the map with this,
Yeah.
and you didn't have to. And like they've seen like stories with my concert stories from the Sunset Strip already, and I didn't know that how much journalism meant to them, and I was like, this is awesome. So one of the metal musicians called it Sareth Fest again, and the name resurrected from the dead, and from like Clive's studio.
Yeah.
And I'm like, all right, I guess we'll call it Sareth Fest Music and Comedy Festival.
That's
And
it. That was very kind of you to say, all right, fine, we'll name it after me. Fine.
Indeed. And I tried so many times to change it, and they're like, no, we're keeping the name. And I'm like, all right, it's your town. It's my town too, but I'm outnumbered by votes. So we're just going to keep it Sareth Fest for the next 10 years or something.
So speaking of that, 10 years later, this would have been the 10th year. And although everything has to be virtual, I saw you had a very good lineup, or a very eclectic lineup of comedy, local musicians. How did you actually pull it off this year?
We didn't have any audience members for the music part. We just live streamed it, and we kept everyone safe. We had their temperatures taken, masks on for most of them, and one had vocals. Everyone was 6 feet apart. For the comedy, we were like, all right, every comic can only bring one guest with them, but we have to be like, socially distanced. And then everyone had to leave after their sets were gone, which is a bummer, because usually they every year they get together and we're like, we love your music, let's put a bill together, and I connect them to the venue owner, and they get future booking gigs, and it was just that's the way it worked. And I take my money that I make from merch, and I buy their merch, and I distribute it to the fans for free.
Fantastic.
So just like it's just a home distribution center, so it's a pretty neat idea.
On that note, we got some great news earlier this week about a vaccine. Looks really good in trials, 90% effective in trials, which could mean that this could get distributed by the end of the year if it gets FDA approved. People are going to start taking it. I see that people like myself and you will be able to go into Walgreens or whatever in May, maybe early June, and just say, hi, I'd like the vaccine, and get the shot right there. Like, it'll be that attainable at that point. When do you see people, with that being in mind, that's my personal thought, that's my personal time frame in my head. When do you see events happening with 500, 1,000 plus people in the room? In other words, when do you see festivals like Sareth Fest really coming back with an audience?
It'll be
a live audience. I don't mean like we're doing right now. I mean a real audience, shoulder to shoulder, rocking out.
As soon as like those vaccines prove that they can actually help, then yeah, let's go for it. Like Florida right now, like I was like, they rarely wear masks anymore. It's like they don't socially distance, and it's just like they don't care anymore. It's just we just want to get life back to normal. And I'm like, I totally agree, but I still wear my mask.
Yeah.
I still
you gotta wear the mask. You got to wear the mask. You have to. I'm here by myself. There's nobody around. But as soon as I walk outside, before I get in the elevator, the mask is on, in case there's somebody in the elevator. It says a lot about how you feel about other people when you wear that mask. I think it's a big statement for your empathy for people who are person next to you in the elevator or down the hall, whatever. They might have pre-existing conditions, underlying conditions where they could be more susceptible to it. So I absolutely agree. Must wear the mask. And I think even when people get the vaccine, that people are still going to be wearing the mask.
Most definitely.
Really think so. So all for 2021, the mask business will still be doing pretty well, in case you're looking for somewhere to put some money. Not that I can say past performance is indicative of future results. I'm not telling you where to put your money, but you're putting your money in merch. Maybe the next merch could be the band's logo on masks, and then you can give them out to all their fans. And then they'll be really excited about wearing masks. They're like, oh, it's my favorite band. Strap it on. But on that same note, Ticketmaster just announced today that they're going to be asking people to prove that they are, that they've taken the vaccine when this comes out, that they are negative, before buying a ticket. There's going to be something on their app where you're able to scan a barcode or scan a QR code or something to show that. That is the tech that's really going to take us back to this time where if I walk into that show and I know it's a Ticketmaster show, it's also a pretty clever way of them doing almost like a PSA for the world, as well as them getting some great branding out there. So if you're at the Ticketmaster event, and if you're there, it's like, I know that you went through the app, and I know that you have tested negative and that you've taken the vaccine, or you wouldn't be here. And I'll feel pretty safe about being at that concert. And I think it'll actually drive ticket sales.
Indeed. I mean, and that's why I became a concert journalist, because I wanted to go to concerts for free, and Ticketmaster and all those other places had too many surcharges and service fees. And that was like my way of getting around all that. And it was just like, it was perfect. I got to be at the perfect place, which was the photo pit, and get real close with the artists and photograph them with no flash. And oh man, but yeah, and my events, it's free to get in, no tickets, but because I didn't want them to pay surcharges or service fees or anything like that. And I wanted them to feel like this is a streaming service, kind of, but with live music, and you can experience that energy. And that's what I went for.
Fantastic. Now I'm going to hop into something real quick. I ask everybody, we'll call this section COVID Confidential. Quickly, I know we're running out of time here, but you're a man of many talents. We know that. Film, narcoleptics, music, stand-up, across the board. You're doing all these different things. But when the pandemic really started kicking in and you were stuck at home and you couldn't go anywhere, did you decide to learn anything new, or did you figure out you had a superpower you didn't know? All of a sudden you're like, wow, I'm like a chef, or I could really make bread. A lot of people see me making bread. It's a little bit disturbing, too much bread. But was it air guitar, or was there something? What was the thing that you did, or maybe the thing you improved on?
There was a bunch I found out about, like my inner superpowers, I guess. And like one was like learning how to meditate and like not focusing, because like my brain feels like it's a game of Tetris inside, or the lament configuration inside my head is constantly turning gears and changing the boxes inside my head. And so I'm like, all right, I gotta learn how to meditate. And then I learned how to keep a garden going, so that was pretty interesting. All the plants were green around me. It was fantastic. I learned how to cook accidentally. So I'm like, I don't want to go out to eat or do carry out, so let's just make some stir fry and see what happens. So I was like, wow, this is pretty good.
I think that's how stir fry was invented. It's like, let's just throw some stuff in there and see what happens. And whoa, that's actually pretty delicious and easy.
Indeed. And then the third one that I learned was how to use these live streaming things. And I've interviewed comedians from like coast to coast, mostly underground, because it's really hard to like interview famous folks when you don't have that many views and you're starting on ground zero.
Yeah.
And then I learned how to write my my one-man show, or one-person show, and I'm debuting it next Saturday at the Jonesy's Escape at the Coffee Shop of Horrors in Tavares, Florida. So it's pretty dope. There's your plug.
I like it.
Indeed. So there's that.
So you keep saying the word indeed. So how can we find you indeed going forward? How can we find out more about the 11th upcoming Sareth Fest? Because I know you're planning it for next year, and everybody hopes that they will be in person to join it. So how can we find out more about that?
Absolutely. I'm not on Indeed.com, surprisingly, but you can find me at aqdpi.com. And if you say it fast, it's aqdpi.com. So you'll never forget it. And my journalism stuff is on there, like my articles, my interviews with other people, and the fest, my stand-up comedy videos, everything. So it's all on there.
Well, if you like music of all genres and you like comedy of all genres as well, come check out Sareth Fest. Sareth, thank you so much for the time. Friends, there you go. Go check him out, and we'll see you next time on Festival Pass Stories.
Thank you, Pat. You rock, dude.
This is Festival Pass Stories, a podcast series is told by the people who create and make festivals come to life. You will go behind the stage, kitchen, or studio door to hear the stories of passion and inspiration that started some of the world's most beloved festivals. Hear the startup stories and how an idea went from what if to what's next.